She arrived at the edge of the world with nothing left to lose. A woman who had built an empire with her bare hands, now unable to stand on her own 2 feet. He was the man everyone in medicine had forgotten, hiding in the Montana mountains with a 7-year-old daughter and a past he couldn't outrun. When desperation forced them together, neither of them was ready for what the other would demand. This is the story of what happens when the only person willing to fight for your future is the one person you never asked to care. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The storm came without warning, the way the worst things always do. Logan Hayes heard the engine before he saw the headlights. He was standing at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee going cold in his hand, watching the first real snow of November blow sideways through the pines, when a pair of headlights appeared at the bottom of the access road, lurching, hesitant, cutting off and coming back on like something was wrong with the electrical. He watched for a few seconds longer than he should have before he set the mug down. "Dad?" Ella's voice came from the hallway. She was 7 years old and had inherited his instinct for noticing things. "There's a car." "I see it." "Who is it?" "Don't know yet." He pulled on his jacket without rushing, zipped it to the throat, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit him clean and hard, the way Montana cold did in November, the kind that reached inside your chest and grabbed. The headlights were closer now, weaving slightly on the unpaved road, and he could hear the engine clearly enough to tell it was something expensive. Too smooth, even struggling. A SUV, black. The kind that didn't belong up here. It stopped 20 feet short of the cabin. For a moment, nothing happened. The engine idled. The snow kept coming. Logan stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets and waited. Then the driver's door opened and a man climbed out. Mid-40s, expensive coat, cell phone already out, and raised toward the sky in the futile gesture of someone searching for signal. He looked at Logan the way people from cities looked at people up here, with a specific kind of relief that said, "Thank God, a human being." "Mr. Hayes," the man called out. He had to raise his voice over the wind. Logan walked down the porch steps. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm the chief of staff for Sophia Bennett." He said the name like Logan should recognize it. When Logan's expression didn't change, Marsh blinked. "Bennett Technologies? I know who she is." Logan had read about the accident 4 months ago. Everyone in the country had. The 30-year-old tech CEO whose autonomous vehicle prototype had rolled on a test track in Nevada, breaking 2 vertebrae in her thoracic spine and leaving her with incomplete paralysis from the mid-chest down. It had been the kind of story that became a symbol, technology failing its own creator. The ruthless irony of it splashed across every headline for a week before the next crisis replaced it. "What does she want with me?" "She wants the treatment." Logan looked at him without expression. "There's no treatment." "Mr. Hayes, I'm a physical therapist in private practice. That's all I do." "Sir?" Marsh's voice dropped. He stepped closer, lowering the phone, and Logan saw something in his face that wasn't sales pitch. It was closer to desperation. "She has been through 4 rehabilitation specialists, 2 experimental surgeries, and 1 clinical trial that put her in the hospital for 6 days. She has the best spinal cord team in the country on retainer, and not one of them has produced so much as a measurable response. She can't feel her legs. She hasn't stood up in 4 months." He paused. "Dr. Elaine Cho referred her to you, personally." Logan was quiet for a moment. The snow settled on his shoulders. "Elaine retired," he said. "I know, she came out of retirement to make this referral. She said, and I'm quoting, that if anyone could find something in the noise, it was you. She said you had a gift for seeing what the scans couldn't show." Marsh watched him. "Ms. Bennett is in the vehicle. She's been in the vehicle for the last 40 minutes while I got up the nerve to knock on your door. She doesn't know I'm standing here telling you this. She would probably fire me if she knew." Logan looked at the SUV. The passenger window was fogged slightly from the inside. He thought about the right answer for a few seconds, which was a few seconds longer than the situation deserved. Then he walked around to the passenger side and knocked twice on the glass. The window came down. Sophia Bennett looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been humiliated by their own body so many times that they have built a wall around the experience and can present it as composure. She was striking, dark hair pulled back, jaw set, eyes sharp enough to make you feel examined. She was wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than Logan's truck, and she was sitting in a way that said she'd learned, recently and unwillingly, how to manage the exact angle of her shoulders to project authority she could no longer produce by standing up. "You're Logan Hayes," she said. "You're Sophia Bennett. I have a proposition." "Marsh told me." Something shifted in her face. She glanced toward her chief of staff with an expression that logged the transgression for later. "Then you already told him no." "I told him there's no treatment." "Then what would you call it?" "An approach," Logan said. "That's different." She studied him. He studied her back, and what he was doing was not what she thought he was doing. He wasn't measuring her the way doctors measured patients, cataloging deficits, calculating odds. He was watching the way she held herself, the micro-adjustments she made without knowing she made them, the particular tension in the muscle groups that could be reached by voluntary signals if the signal was still there and just lost its road. He'd seen it before. He'd been wrong before too, but he saw something. "What's different about an approach?" she asked. "A treatment means I know what's going to happen. An approach means I have a theory and I'm willing to test it. Those aren't the same thing." "What's your theory?" "It requires more than a parking lot conversation in a snowstorm." She almost smiled. It didn't quite form, but the ghost of it was there. "Fair enough." She looked at the cabin, then back at him. "Is there room?" There was room, technically. The cabin had 3 bedrooms, Logan's, Ella's, and the one he used as a storage room that held exercise equipment he'd built or modified himself, 2 filing cabinets, and a workbench. Getting Sophia from the car to the cabin took 20 minutes, a portable ramp that Marsh produced from the back of the SUV, and a manual wheelchair that looked brand new and expensive, and that Sophia navigated with the kind of efficient, angry precision of someone who had decided that if they were going to be in this chair, they were going to be excellent at it. Ella was in the doorway when they came up the ramp. She had Logan's dark hair and her mother's eyes, though Logan didn't think about that the way he used to. She was wearing her pajamas with the wolves on them and holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear that had been loved nearly off. She looked at the wheelchair with open curiosity and none of the careful avoidance that adults used. "What happened to your legs?" she asked. "Ella." Logan's voice was flat. "It's fine," Sophia said. She looked at Ella directly, which most adults didn't do when kids asked hard questions. "I was in an accident. My spine got hurt and it told my legs to stop working for a while." "For a while?" Ella said. "That's the current plan." Ella considered this with the gravity of a child processing new information. "I broke my wrist last year. It hurt really bad, but it got better. Is it like that?" "A little more complicated," Sophia said, "but the hoping part is the same." Ella nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. She stepped aside to let them in. The first night, Sophia slept in Logan's room because it had the most floor clearance, and Logan slept on the couch without being asked. He lay awake for a while listening to the storm work itself out against the windows and thinking about Elaine Cho, who had been his mentor for 6 years and who had watched what happened in Austin and never blamed him, which sometimes felt worse than if she had. He thought about what he'd seen in the parking lot, the specific quality of the tension pattern in Sophia's trapezius, and the way her breath changed, barely, nearly imperceptibly, when she shifted her weight left. It might be nothing, referred muscle memory, compensatory pattern, but it might not be. He got up at 5 and made coffee and stood at the window, and by the time the snow stopped just before dawn, he had decided that he would at least run the assessment. What he decided after that would depend on what the assessment showed. Sophia woke at 6:30 and immediately tried to reach for her phone on the nightstand before remembering she'd placed it too far away and had to push herself up with both arms to get it. This was the daily comedy she had not yet found funny, the constant renegotiation with a body that no longer did what it was told. She had 8 emails, 4 texts, and a voicemail from the board. She deleted the voicemail without listening to it. The room smelled like pine and old wood and something baking, something with cinnamon. It was disorienting. Her apartment in San Francisco smelled like nothing, which she'd always considered a virtue of a properly maintained home. This smelled like someone lived here. She worked herself into the chair without calling anyone, which took 3 minutes and cost her the specific kind of frustration that no longer surprised her. Then she went to find out where the smell was coming from. The kitchen was at the end of the hall. Logan was at the stove. Ella was already at the table, already dressed, eating oatmeal with alarming focus. The table was the kind of heavy wood furniture that got made in this part of the country to last, scarred along the edges, warm in color, 4 chairs that didn't match. "There's coffee," Logan said, not turning around. "Mugs by the pot." Sophia got her own coffee. She'd been doing that since the accident, refusing to let people bring her things, carry things for her, hand her things, partly out of stubbornness and partly because she understood instinctively that the moment you stopped reaching, you stopped being a person who could. She sat at the table across from Ella. "Do you want brown sugar?" Ella asked. "Dad puts too much in mine, but I think it's right." "I'll try it the way you have it." Ella looked pleased. The assessment took most of the morning. Logan worked the way he'd always worked, methodically and without the clinical theater that specialists favored. No formal intake forms spread across a conference table, no long pauses before delivering verdict-like observations. He worked in the storage room he'd cleared out the night before, which now had enough space for the padded table, the parallel bars he'd built himself from pipe and hardwood, and 2 chairs. Sophia had been in enough rehabilitation settings to recognize that this was unconventional. She hadn't been in any that smelled like sawdust. He asked her to tell him the story of the accident, but not in the way that neurologists asked, not the medical chronology, onset of symptoms, timeline of interventions. He asked what she remembered about the moment itself, the physical memory, what she felt. "I remember the impact," she said, "and then I remember not feeling things I should have felt." Where did the not feeling start? She described it carefully, because that was how her mind worked, precisely in sequence. He listened without writing anything down, which bothered her for the first 10 minutes and then stopped bothering her because she realized he was actually listening rather than filtering her words into a form. He tested her sensation thresholds, motor response, reflex. He did things she hadn't had done before. Lateral pressure tests, proprioceptive challenges, subtle assessments of trunk control that seemed almost passive until she understood what he was measuring. At one point he had her close her eyes and told her to focus on her left thigh and try, not to move it, but just to intend to move it, to generate the signal without expecting a result. "What's the point of that?" she asked. "Diagnostic," he said. "Keep going." She did. 30 seconds, maybe 40. "Okay." He made a note for the first time on a small yellow pad. "Try the right." She tried. He made another note. "What did you find?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He set the pad down and looked at her directly, and she noticed that his eyes were the kind of gray that read as blue in certain light, and that he had the qualities she associated with surgeons and pilots. The capacity for stillness that was not passivity, but something closer to the suspension of unnecessary motion. "The 4 specialists before me, what did they tell you?" "That recovery of function was unlikely. One said impossible, but framed it as statistically improbable to soften it." "And you believed them?" "I'm a data person. They had data." "They had their data," Logan said. "Data from a population that didn't include you. What I'm looking for right now isn't population data. It's your specific signal." He stood up, moved to the end of the table where her feet were. "I want to try something. Tell me if you feel pressure or warmth." "Either. You don't need to be certain," she told him. 3 times out of 11 attempts, she reported something. The something was faint, and she qualified it every time, the way someone qualifies information they don't trust. "I think. Maybe. It might be nothing." Logan didn't tell her what it meant. He wrote it down. That afternoon, Ella came to find her. Sophia was in the living room with her laptop open, trying to do the thing she always did when she was frightened: work. There were 18 items on her task list, and she'd gotten through 4 of them, but her concentration kept slipping, which it hadn't done before the accident, or if it had, she'd never noticed. "Are you doing work stuff?" Ella asked from the doorway. "Trying to. Dad works from in here too sometimes. He says it's hard to think in a room that doesn't have good light." She looked at the window. "That window gets afternoon sun." Sophia looked at the window. Thank you. Are you scared? Ella asked. Sophia looked back at her. The question didn't have the weight adults attached to it. It wasn't a confrontation or a probe, just something Ella wanted to know, because she was the kind of child who asked direct questions when she wanted direct answers. Some of the time, Sophia said. Me too, Ella said. Sometimes I'm scared my dad will have to go away again. He went away once when I was little, and he was very sad when he came back. She said this matter-of-factly, as children did with the things they'd learned to carry. But he didn't go away forever, so that's something. Sophia looked at her for a moment. Yeah, she said quietly. That is something. Ella came and sat on the end of the couch, tucked her feet under her, and opened a book with a dragon on the cover. She didn't ask permission. She just settled in the way children settle when they've decided a space is safe. Sophia looked at her laptop for another minute. Then she moved to the window where the afternoon light came in. Eat. The second day, Logan started her on the parallel bars. She already knew parallel bars. She'd done them in the first rehabilitation facility, and the second, and the first 3 weeks of the third, before she discharged herself when the lead therapist told her, in the specific language of clinical realism, to begin adjusting her expectations toward a supported independence model. She'd known what that meant. She'd thrown a clipboard. She didn't mention the clipboard. What she discovered in the first session with Logan was that he used the bars differently. He wasn't asking her to walk. He was asking her to stand. Specifically, to stand with as little input from her arms as possible and as much intentional focus as she could manage on the muscles he'd identified the day before, the ones that showed traces of signal. He talked her through it the way a coach talked through something technical. Not emotional encouragement, just precise instruction delivered without apology. Left trunk lower. Don't let the hip drop. That's a compensation pattern. It's not what I'm after. I can't. You're doing it right now. Don't think about whether you can. Just don't let the hip drop. She gritted her teeth. She held. She lasted 14 seconds before her arms took over and she sagged. He wrote it down. That's better than yesterday, he said. I wasn't doing this yesterday. You were doing the component parts. 14 seconds, full hold, that's a starting number. She looked at him. You're counting seconds. I'm counting everything, he said. Seconds, millimeters, degrees of extension. This whole thing runs on data. I thought you were a data person. She almost said something sharp. Instead, she said, set me up again. He did. The evenings were the strangest part. Sophia had structured her life for the last 5 years with very little unstructured time. Unstructured time was where doubt lived, and she'd found that if she kept moving fast enough, the doubt couldn't keep pace. She'd built Bennett Technologies in 6 years on the principle that the next task was always more important than the current feeling. The cabin had no Wi-Fi after 9 p.m. because Logan had set the router to cut off at that hour for Ella's sake and hadn't bothered to create an exception for himself, which meant it didn't create one for Sophia either. The first night she'd found the off time before she'd found the router, and then she'd found the router and been unsurprised and mildly aggravated, and then sat at the kitchen table in the silence, feeling the particular discomfort of stillness. Logan came in from the cold at 9:15. He'd been checking something on the property, and found her there. Router cuts off at 9, he said, which she already knew. I noticed. He poured himself water, leaned against the counter, looked at her with the kind of easy directness that some people read as rudeness and others read as respect. You can't sleep? I don't usually need much. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. Since the accident, not really well. No. Pain? Not exactly. More like the absence of sensation reads as a kind of noise. It's hard to explain. She'd tried to explain it to her doctors and watched them note it in their files under subjective sleep disturbance in a way that told her the notation didn't really include the substance. My body's constantly reporting something wrong and my brain can't stop listening. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, which was not what she'd expected. She'd expected him to offer a medication recommendation and go to bed. When I was a resident, he said, I had a patient, 34 years old, construction accident, T6 injury, guy named Marcus. He told me something similar, said the quiet was the loudest part. He turned his water glass in his hands, the movement of someone who thought better when their hands had something to do. It took me about 6 months to understand that when I was trying to reach the nervous system, the biggest obstacle wasn't the injury. It was the fear pattern the nervous system had built around the injury. The brain learns to protect the wound even when protecting it makes things worse. You're saying my nervous system is afraid. I'm saying nervous systems learn. Whatever yours learned in the first weeks after the accident, how to redistribute, how to compensate, what signals to block, it learned fast and it learned hard. What we're doing is trying to teach it something different. He looked at her. That takes time. And it takes the brain being in a state where it can receive new information rather than just running the old pattern, which requires sleep. Which requires something like rest. Sleep's one version of it. She thought about that for a moment. What's another version? Something that slows the monitoring down. Something that stops the brain from auditing everything. He shrugged slightly. Different for different people. Sophia looked at her hands. Ella, this afternoon, she was just sitting in the room, reading. She didn't ask me anything after the first question. She didn't check on me. She just sat there. Yeah, Logan said. She does that. It helped. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same territory. Recognition, maybe. Or something adjacent to warmth that he kept at a slight distance, because warmth was something he was careful with. She has good instincts, he said. She's had to develop them. Sophia didn't ask what that meant. She filed it for later, the way she filed most things that felt too large for the current moment. Mom. The weeks that followed had a rhythm she hadn't expected. She'd expected the structure of rehabilitation. She knew that shape, the scheduled appointments, the measured increments, the clinical check-ins. What she hadn't expected was that the rhythm of the cabin would absorb her into something less clinical and more like ordinary life. Ella went to school in town on the mornings when the road was clear enough, which was 3 days out of 5. On the days she stayed home, she migrated between her homework at the kitchen table and wherever Sophia happened to be, with the undemanding ease of a child who had learned to be comfortable in adult company without requiring it to perform for her. She was, Sophia discovered, building a business, not in the way adults use the word. No revenue, no market analysis. But Ella had a very serious project involving hand-drawn maps of the property, a collection of what she called interesting rocks that she was classifying by her own system, and a notebook filled with observations about animals she'd seen, organized by date and weather conditions. She'd been keeping it for 2 years. What's the business part? Sophia asked one afternoon, looking at the notebook. Someday I'm going to write a book about Montana animals, Ella said, with my own drawings, and people can buy it and use it when they go outside. A field guide. Ella looked up. Is that what it's called? That's what naturalists call them, people who study the natural world. Sophia looked at the notebook more closely. The entries were detailed beyond what she'd have expected from a 7-year-old. Not just sightings, but behavior, what the animal was doing, what the light was like. These are good observations, the detail work. Ella beamed. It was uncomplicated and whole, the way children were pleased by things, not calculating whether the praise was warranted. Dad taught me that. He says you have to write down what you actually see, not what you expect to see. Sophia was quiet for a moment. That's good advice. He says it works for other things too, not just animals. Logan said it more bluntly one morning when she pushed back on a session. It was the 3rd week. She'd been awake most of the night, one of the bad ones, the noise-filled quiet that no position alleviated, and she came to the session underprepared in a way she couldn't hide. He could read her physical state in seconds. She'd learned that early, and he read it now. We can adjust today, he said. Different kind of work. I don't need... This isn't negotiable based on wanting to push through. Pushing through on the wrong day doesn't build, it breaks. I've seen it. She looked at him. You talk about what you've seen like you're very certain of it. I'm certain of that particular thing, he said evenly. Other things, less. Like whether this works. Like whether this works, he agreed. I'm not going to tell you what I don't know. She sat with that. Every specialist I've worked with has given me a probability range, outcome estimates, risk-adjusted projections. I know. That's useful information. It helps me make decisions. Does it? He looked at her without challenge. The question was genuine. Or does it give you a framework that feels like information but is actually just someone else's fear that they've formatted to look like data? She opened her mouth and then didn't say anything. The function you still have, Logan said, and I do believe you have function you haven't accessed yet. That doesn't care about probability ranges. It either comes back or it doesn't. And what influences which way that goes is the work and the conditions we create for the work. He pulled a stool over and sat down at her level, which was something she'd noticed he did. He didn't loom, he didn't stand over patients in the way that communicated hierarchy. I'm not going to lie to you about outcomes, but I'm also not going to let someone else's estimate of what's possible be the ceiling of what we try, she said after a long moment. Okay. Okay, we adjust today, or okay, something else? Both, she said. I think both. Marsh came back at the end of the third week. He drove up in the same SUV, this time in daylight, and knocked on the cabin door like someone who'd rehearsed the visit. Logan let him in with the flat neutrality of a man who had formed no opinion of Daniel Marsh, other than that he was a person doing a job that required him to be places he wasn't comfortable. Sophia took the meeting in the kitchen. Logan stayed out of it, took Ella to check on the property, came back 40 minutes later to find Sophia at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her jaw set in a way he'd come to associate with particular categories of internal conflict. "Everything okay?" he asked. "The board moved up their timeline for the quarterly review," she said. "I need to present remotely next week." "You can do that from here." "I know." She didn't look up. Marsh also brought documents. Board is already talking about partnership structures for Q3 if certain product milestones are hit. She typed something. "Apparently there's renewed investor interest in the neurotechnology sector. VCs tend to cluster around visible proof-of-concept stories." Logan poured coffee. "That's how it works." "Yes." She looked up. "It is." He looked at her. He couldn't read what was underneath the sentence, whether it was a statement or the beginning of something else. "You want to talk about it?" "Not yet," she said. "I need to think first." He respected that. He went to start dinner, and they moved around the kitchen with the unfussy ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms without consciously deciding to. The milestone that changed the tenor of the month came on a Tuesday, overcast, just before noon. They were at the parallel bars. Sophia was 22 days into the program, and her numbers had moved. The session data Logan kept on the yellow pad told a story of incremental, uneven progress, the kind that didn't look like anything dramatic when you were inside it, but formed a pattern when you stepped back. She was up to 41 seconds on the standing hold. The sensation reports were happening more consistently on the left side, less qualifying in her language. Logan was standing at the side of the bars when she said quietly, "I felt that." He'd applied light manual pressure to her left hip. Standard assessment. He did it routinely without announcing it, as part of the ongoing sensory mapping. "The pressure?" he said. "Not exactly." Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard before, still contained but with something underneath it, something cracked open. More like warm, a kind of radiating warmth on the outside of the left thigh. He pressed his mouth together. He did not react. Reaction was one of the ways you set people up for disappointment, because reaction meant expectation, and expectation meant the next session had a standard it had to meet. He moved to the yellow pad. Duration? Maybe 5 seconds. She was looking straight ahead, the way people looked when they were concentrating on an internal signal. "It's gone now." "Okay." He made the note. "Same side, slightly lower. Tell me if anything changes." She nodded. He worked the area for 10 more minutes. She reported sensation twice more, so fleeting, variable, qualified. He wrote everything down. When the session ended and she'd transferred back to the chair, she looked at the yellow pad in his hand. "Is that good?" she asked. The composure was still there, but barely. Under it was a person who had stopped believing months ago and was very carefully, very tentatively considering whether to start again. Logan looked at the pad, then at her. "It's a signal," he said, "a real one." He paused. "Yeah, it's good." Sophia Bennett, who had built a company from nothing, who had survived a crash that should have killed her, who had sat in 4 different rehabilitation offices and heard variations on the word unlikely until the word had started to feel like oxygen, pressed her lips together and looked at the wall and did not cry. She was very close to crying. The proximity of it was visible. She didn't because she wasn't ready yet to be someone who cried in front of Logan Hayes. But she was very close. Note, Ella noticed before anyone talked about it. That was the thing about Ella. She didn't observe from a distance. She observed from inside things, from within the ordinary fabric of days, and so she caught what adults missed. She came to find Sophia that evening while Logan was doing the dishes, and she said, without preamble, "Your face looks different today." Sophia looked up from where she was working by the window. "How so?" Ella thought about it with the focused seriousness she brought to most questions. "Less like you're waiting for something bad," she said finally. "More just like you're waiting." Sophia looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think that's about right." Ella nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her field guide notebook. Sophia watched her for a moment. This small, serious, entirely genuine person who had no idea how much she'd given just by showing up and sitting nearby and asking one right question at the right time. She turned back to her window. Outside, the Montana night was settling in around the pine trees, and the sky was doing the thing it did up here that it didn't do anywhere else she'd lived, going from dark blue to absolute black in a way that made the stars arrive all at once, like something being switched on. She looked at it for a while. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work. The signal didn't come back the next day. Sophia didn't say that. She didn't have to. Logan could read the answer in the way she approached the bars. The particular set of her shoulders that was less determination and more bracing, the kind of posture people wore when they'd let themselves believe something the night before and were now preparing for the possibility that it had been a one-time event, a trick of the nervous system, a single note that wasn't the beginning of a song. He didn't address it directly. He ran the session the same way he always ran it, methodical, specific, without dramatic investment in any single data point. That was the work. You didn't celebrate individual signals, and you didn't mourn their absence. You built the conditions for them, and you kept building. "Left trunk, lower," he said. "Same as yesterday." She held the position, 14 seconds, 20, 30. Her arms were doing less of the work than they used to, which was real progress even when it didn't feel like anything. "Anything?" he asked. "No," she said, flat. Not resigned exactly, but close to it. "Okay, hold 3 more seconds and release." She held, released, sat back in the chair and looked at her hands in her lap for a moment, and he let her have that moment without trying to fill it with encouragement, because encouragement at the wrong time felt like being managed, and Sophia Bennett did not respond well to being managed. "The signal was real," he said, when the moment had run its course. "One occurrence doesn't establish a pattern. Neither does one absence." She looked up. "I know that. I know you know it. I'm saying it anyway." "Why?" "Because knowing it and feeling it are different things, and you're clearly feeling it." He pulled the stool over. "Talk to me about what's going on." She looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding how much to give. It was a specific look. Not defensive, more like calculation. How much information does this situation require? She did it with everyone, he suspected, and probably didn't know she did it. "I had a call with my CTO last night," she said, after Ella went to bed. "Marcus, he's been with me since the beginning, before the Series A. He built half the infrastructure we run on." She paused. "He told me the board is talking about bringing in an interim CEO for the next 2 quarters. Officially, it's framed as operational support while I focus on recovery. Unofficially, it means they've been running the numbers on what happens if I don't come back functional." Logan didn't say anything. "They're not wrong to run those numbers," she said. "I would run those numbers. That's responsible governance." She said it with the tone of someone reciting a position they've practiced believing. But Marcus said it differently than the board did. He said they were running those numbers in the context of a specific conversation about who would take over the neurotechnology division if, and he used that word, if, certain rehabilitation outcomes materialized. "Meaning your recovery," Logan said. "Meaning whatever happens here," she said. whatever you're doing. Someone on the board has been talking. I don't know who, I don't know what they were told, but the language Marcus used, rehabilitation outcomes, that's not investor language. That's clinical language someone brought into a boardroom. She looked at him. Who have you talked to about this besides Elaine Cho? The question was direct in a way that wasn't accusatory yet. It was a person who needed information and was asking for it without drama. Nobody, Logan said. Elaine knows the general approach. She doesn't know your specific case, and I haven't communicated with her since you arrived. Sophia held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. She accepted that, not because she was naive, but because she was a good reader of people, and Logan had consistently been what he appeared to be, which in her experience was rarer than it should have been. Then someone on my team talked, she said. Either Marsh or someone Marsh talked to. That's a problem you need to handle, Logan said. I can't help you with that one. I know. She looked at the parallel bars. Can we run it again? He stood up. Yeah, let's run it again. Marcel. She handled it the way she handled operational problems, efficiently and without visible emotion, at least to anyone who wasn't watching closely. Logan was watching closely, not because he was looking for anything in particular, but because watching her was something he'd fallen into the habit of, the way you fell into the habit of anything that demanded consistent attention. She spent the evening on calls. He could hear the shape of the conversations through the closed door of the room. Not the words, just the register. Controlled, precise, occasionally sharp. She had a voice for business that was slightly different from her regular voice, a quality of deliberate authority that was impressive in its way, and also a little sad, in the way that armor was always a little sad, because it meant something had made it necessary. Marsh called it 8. That conversation was shorter and the register was different, clipped in a way that the others hadn't been. Logan was in the kitchen starting the dishes, and he could hear the specific quality of the silence after she hung up. She came out 20 minutes later, moving the chair with the controlled aggression she defaulted to when she was working something out internally. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. Marsh told 2 people, she said. His assistant, who told her boyfriend, who happens to work for a consulting firm that does due diligence for one of our institutional investors. She said it with the kind of precision that came from having already processed the anger into information. Classic 3 degrees of separation leak. Nobody did it maliciously. They did it because they thought it was interesting news, which makes it worse in some ways because there's no one to fire. What are you going to do? Logan asked. I already did it. Marsh issued a clarification to the board. I sent a personal note to the investor in question stating that I'm engaged in private physical therapy and that any characterization of it as something more significant is premature. She paused. Which is technically accurate. Technically, Logan said. She looked at him. Is it more than that yet? He dried his hands on a dish towel and thought about it, not performing thoughtfulness, actually thinking. The signal you felt was real. The session data has a trend. Is it a breakthrough? No. Is it more than standard PT? Yes. Is it anything I'd attach a press release to? Absolutely not. He put the towel down. You told the board the truth. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. Marcus told me the board wants a video call. They want to see me. Not discuss numbers. See me. Verify that I'm functional. You are functional. I'm functional from the shoulders up, she said, which is what they know how to measure. She moved into the kitchen fully, stopped by the counter, looked at the coffee maker with the expression of someone wanting coffee at an hour when coffee was a bad idea. Can I ask you something? Yeah. The approach you use. Does it have a name? Is there published research? He was quiet for a moment. There's some foundational work in neuroplasticity and sensory motor re-education that it draws from. The specific integration I use isn't published. Why not? Another pause. Longer. Because the last time I ran it with enough statistical power to make publishing meaningful, the results were mixed. Good results in some patients, nothing in others, and one case where the patient... He stopped. Started again. The outcome was bad, not because of the treatment, but the timeline and the expectations around it contributed to a situation that ended badly. He looked at the counter. So I practice quietly. I don't publish what I don't fully understand yet. Sophia looked at him. She was doing the thing she did when she filed something for later. A slight narrowing, a stillness. "Okay," she said. "That's all? Okay?" "You answered the question honestly. That's what I needed." She turned the chair toward the hallway. "I'm going to try to sleep." "Good idea." "Logan." She stopped without turning fully around. "Thank you for telling me the truth about what it is and what it isn't." He didn't have a smooth response to that. He said, "Yeah," and she went to bed. Ella's friendship with Sophia developed the way real friendships developed. Not through a single moment, but through accumulated small ones, each unremarkable on its own. It started with the field guide. Sophia had made a comment about observation methodology, the offhand remark of someone who recognized rigor when she saw it, and Ella had received it the way she received everything that engaged her genuine interest, with her full self, not performing enthusiasm, but actually having it. She'd started bringing the notebook to wherever Sophia was working in the afternoons, adding entries with the focused quiet of someone doing real work, occasionally reading observations aloud when she thought they were particularly good. "Yesterday, I saw the same hawk 3 times in different places," Ella said one afternoon, not looking up from the notebook. "I think it's patrolling." "What makes you think it's the same one?" Sophia asked. She was reviewing documents, but had found, over the last few weeks, that Ella's observations had the useful quality of requiring just enough attention to pull her out of her own head without demanding so much that she couldn't monitor both things simultaneously. "The left wing," Ella said. "There's a gap in the feathers near the outside edge. It's distinctive." Sophia looked up. "You identified it by a specific physical marker." "Yeah. That's how field researchers track individual animals. They call it a natural mark." Ella looked very pleased. "I didn't know it had a name. I just thought it was how you paid attention." "That's kind of exactly what it is," Sophia said. Ella wrote something in the notebook. Then, "Do you have a company?" "I do." "What does it make?" "Software and hardware. Technology systems. Mainly things that help machines learn from data." She paused. "Actually, some of the work is about how machines recognize patterns, similar to what you just did with the hawk." Ella thought about this. "But machines don't feel anything when they see the pattern." "No," Sophia said. "They don't." "That seems like it would make it less interesting," Ella said. Sophia looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I've been thinking about that lately." The thing was, she meant it. Before the accident, she hadn't distinguished between pattern recognition as a technical process and pattern recognition as an experience. The algorithm found the signal or it didn't. The variable that made it meaningful was the outcome, the application, the downstream value. She hadn't thought about the part in between, the noticing itself. What happened when you located something significant in noise and felt it before you could name it? She'd been thinking about it since Logan applied pressure to her left hip on a Tuesday in November, and her body, against all statistical probability, said warm. Progress was not linear, and Logan had never pretended it would be. The 4th week brought 2 good sessions and one that was essentially nothing. No sensation reports, degraded hold times, Sophia coming to the bars carrying something heavy that she hadn't named yet and that Logan didn't push her to name because the push wouldn't help. He adapted the session and said nothing about the gap between this week and last week and logged the data without comment. The 5th week was better. The sensation in the left thigh was becoming more consistent. Not reliable, not something he'd stake a claim on, but recurring often enough that he'd started mapping it, marking the specific conditions under which it appeared. Time of day, session sequencing, what she'd eaten, how much she'd slept, whether she came in calm or came in carrying the weight of whatever the board had said or hadn't said. The sleep variable was real. He could see it clearly enough in the data to note it without hesitation. When she slept badly, the session was compromised. Not every time, some of her best sensation reports had come on bad sleep days, the nervous system doing something unpredictable. But as a trend, the correlation was strong. He brought it up one afternoon after a session that had been notably good following a night she'd described as the best sleep she'd had since arriving. "I want to try adding something in the evenings," he said. "Not medical, more environmental." She looked at him. "Define environmental." Reducing the threshold stimulus before sleep. Not screens, not work, not calls that leave you in problem-solving mode for 2 hours. He paused. I know that's not going to be popular. It's not a problem to solve, she said. I work at night because I work at night. It's always been how I function. How you functioned before, he said. She didn't answer immediately. He recognized the pause. It was the one she used when she was deciding whether to argue a point she knew she couldn't fully win or accept it provisionally and resent it. What would you replace it with, she asked, which he'd learned was her version of fine. Go ahead. Nothing specific, less stimulation, whatever that looks like for you. What it looked like for her, it turned out, was the kitchen table after Ella went to bed, with tea she didn't particularly like because Logan didn't drink coffee after 7. And whatever conversation happened to come up, or sometimes no conversation at all, he'd sit across from her and read or work on something with his hands. He had a habit of repairing small things, a hinge, a drawer pull, a section of the bench in the mudroom, the kind of maintenance a person who lived alone in a place they owned did without thinking about it. She found it, against her expectations, not unpleasant. Can I ask what you were doing before this? She said one evening, about 10 days into the experiment. Before the cabin. He looked up from the hinge he was working on. What do you mean, before the cabin? You're clearly not a country boy who's always lived in the mountains. Your education, your assessment techniques, you trained somewhere serious. Say, she held her mug in both hands. And then you're up here, with a workbench and a 7-year-old. He set the screwdriver down. University of Washington for the PT doctorate. Then a residency in Seattle. Then I got recruited into a research group at a clinic in Austin that was working on neuromotor rehabilitation. High-level stuff, good funding, good team. He picked up the screwdriver again. I was there for 3 years. Austin, she said. That's where the bad outcome happened. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise. He'd known she'd filed it and was waiting for the right moment. Yeah, what happened? He was quiet for long enough that she almost pulled the question back. Patient named Sandra Reyes, he said. 41 years old. Cervical injury, partial function retained in both hands, some trunk control. She was driven, the way you're driven. She'd decided that the research program was going to fix her, and she'd communicated that clearly to everyone around her, including her husband and her teenage kids, and nobody in the program wanted to be the one to walk that back because the data was genuinely promising. He turned the screwdriver in his hand. I was running her protocol specifically. I saw progress, real progress, measurable, consistent. I talked about it the way I shouldn't have. Not in her presence, but in team meetings, in the way I wrote the weekly summaries, like it was a success story in progress. What went wrong? 6 weeks in, she hit a wall. Hard. The progress plateaued and then reversed slightly. Normal variation, nothing that should have changed the long-term picture. But she'd built everything on a specific expectation of trajectory, and when the trajectory bent, she couldn't hold it. He set the screwdriver down again and looked at the table. She hurt herself. She didn't die, but the hospitalization ended the protocol and she never came back to the program. He paused. Her husband sent me an email 6 months later. Professional, no blame. Just telling me she was doing okay, and that she'd said she thought I was a good therapist, but that I'd made her feel like she was inside someone else's story instead of her own. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. That's why you don't give me projections, Sophia said. That's why I don't give you projections. She turned her mug in her hands. I appreciate it, she said. Even when it's frustrating, I do understand why. I know you do. I'm not Sandra, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not building my life around a specific outcome here. I'm building it around what's in front of me. She looked up. I've already started doing that differently, actually. Before I came here, I was building everything around what I was going to get back to. The company, the pace, the version of me that existed before the accident. And somewhere in the last few weeks, that's shifted. I'm not sure I can fully articulate it. You don't have to, Logan said. I know. I'm trying anyway. He looked at her, and she looked back. And for a moment, neither of them was occupying any role. Not patient, not therapist, not CEO, not former researcher. Just two people at a kitchen table late at night, both of them carrying things that had reshaped them, neither of them entirely sure of the shape they were becoming. Then Logan picked up the screwdriver and finished the hinge. The session where something actually shifted happened on a Wednesday morning at the end of week 6. No single thing had announced it. The week had been consistent, not spectacular, not poor, just the steady accumulation that Logan logged and tracked and did not editorialize about. Sophia had slept reasonably well for 3 nights running. She'd had a call with her CTO that had gone well enough that she came to the morning session without the particular tension she carried when the board was in a bad phase. They were at the bars, standard position. She'd been holding for 38 seconds with good trunk engagement when Logan applied the lateral pressure to her left hip, and she said quietly but without qualification, "I feel that." "Warm?" he asked. "Pressure," she said. "Actual pressure." He pressed his lips together, did not react. "Hold the position." She held. He moved the contact point slightly, lower, inner aspect of the thigh. "Anything?" "No. Back to where you were." He returned. She said, "Yes, that one." He worked for 90 seconds. She reported sensation 7 times in 90 seconds, all left side, all consistent with the area he was contacting. The duration was variable, some fleeting, one lasting almost 10 seconds. But the consistency was different from everything that had come before. It wasn't scattered, it had geography. When he stopped, she was gripping the bars with both hands and her breathing had changed. "Logan," she said, "I know. That's different." "Yeah," he said, "it is." She looked straight ahead, not at him, in the way she looked when she needed a moment before she could trust her face. Her knuckles were white on the bars. He let her have the silence because this was a moment that deserved it, and crowding it with explanation would be wrong. After about 30 seconds, she said, "What does it mean?" "It means the pathway has more integrity than the scans showed, the signal's finding its way." He was careful with his words, precise, no overreach. "It doesn't tell us how far it goes or how far it's going to go. But the architecture is there." She turned her head and looked at him. Her composure was intact, but barely. The kind of barely that required active effort and looked like stillness from the outside, but was actually the opposite. "Is this the part where I'm supposed to cry?" she said. "If you want to," he said. "I don't want to," she said. "I just—" She stopped. "I'd stopped believing it was possible. I want you to know that. I'm telling you because you should know what you're working with. I'd actually genuinely stopped." "I know," he said. "You knew?" "I could see it," he said. "From the first session. You were working hard, but you weren't working with hope. You were working with stubbornness." She stared at him. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "Stubbornness got us to this session. Hope might get us further." He paused. "But we take it one session at a time." She turned back to face forward, took a breath, then, "Set me up again." He didn't ask if she was sure. He just reset the position and they kept working. That evening, Ella noticed. Not the specific thing, she didn't have the context for the specific thing, but she noticed the particular quality of the air in the cabin, the way she noticed when something had changed, even something she couldn't name. She was at the kitchen table working on a drawing for the field guide, a rough-tailed hawk, labeled with careful print, when Sophia came in from the session room moving the chair with slightly less of the controlled aggression she usually brought to it. "You look different again," Ella said, looking up. "Good different or bad different?" Sophia asked. Ella considered. "Like when I finished reading a book I wasn't sure I was going to like, and then I really liked it." Sophia stopped the chair and looked at her. "That's very specific." "It's a specific face," Ella said. Sophia looked at the drawing. "Is that the patrol hawk?" "Yeah." Ella turned it around so Sophia could see. She'd drawn the wing gap carefully, the distinctive marker she'd been tracking, the thing that made this specific hawk itself rather than any hawk. "I'm going to call him Victor." "Victor," Sophia said. "Why Victor?" "It sounds like a name for someone who keeps coming back," Ella said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yeah, it does." She stayed at the table for a while after that, and the 3 of them, Logan coming in with dinner, Ella finishing her drawing, Sophia sitting by the window with her laptop mostly closed, occupied the same space in the kind of quiet that didn't require anything from anyone, the kind that accumulated without announcement into something that, if you'd been paying attention, you might have started calling home. The week after the Wednesday session, progress moved the way rivers moved in spring, not steadily but in sudden surges followed by plateaus that felt like reversals but weren't. Logan mapped it all. The yellow pads were filling up. He was on the fourth one now, the earlier three stacked in the filing cabinet with dates on the covers in his handwriting. He tracked the sensation reports the way a geologist tracked strata, not expecting uniformity, looking for pattern across the variation. Left thigh, lateral aspect, pressure sensitivity improving. Left hip, moderate, right side beginning to register. Faintly, inconsistently, but beginning. Trunk control measurably better than week 1, the hold times now regularly exceeding 60 seconds without arm compensation. He didn't present this to Sophia as a speech. He showed her the pad one morning, the raw numbers, and let her read it herself. That was how she preferred information. She read it twice, the way she read everything twice, and handed it back without comment. The next session she came in with something different in her posture. Not hope exactly, more like the willingness to be present in the work without the constant background processing of whether it was worth it. That, as much as the sensation reports, was progress. Ella, meanwhile, had promoted Sophia to a position of genuine professional consultation on the field guide. It had happened organically enough. Sophia had made a few observations about documentation methodology, the importance of consistent notation, the value of cross-referencing citing conditions with behavioral data, and Ella had incorporated them without fanfare and then started asking for more. She wanted to know about databases, whether her system of organization could scale, whether photographs should supplement drawings or replace them. Supplement, Sophia said definitively. The drawing makes you look. The photograph just records. You need both. Ella wrote this down in the notebook with the seriousness of someone taking minutes at an important meeting. What's the best way to organize by date and by animal at the same time? Cross-indexing. You keep two parallel systems and they reference each other. That seems complicated. It is at first, Sophia said. Then it becomes how you think. She paused. Can I show you something? She pulled her laptop open. She was getting faster at transitioning from the chair to work position, the efficiency improving without Logan having to say anything about it, and built a simple spreadsheet structure while Ella watched from beside her, close enough that her hair nearly touched Sophia's arm. Sophia walked her through the logic of it, column by column, and Ella asked questions that were occasionally simple and occasionally so precise that Sophia had to recalibrate her explanation. She's like you, Logan said that evening. He'd come in from outside to find them still at the table, Ella transferring her notebook entries into the new structure with a pencil and occasional corrections. She's better than me, Sophia said. She asks better questions. Logan looked at his daughter, the focused tilt of her head, the pencil moving in careful print. He had the expression he got when he was watching Ella do something that showed him a version of her he hadn't seen before. Not surprise. Something slower than surprise. She didn't have many people to do things like this with, he said, quietly enough that Ella couldn't hear. It's been mostly just us up here. Sophia looked at him. That's... why? He picked up the coffee mug she'd vacated and held it. Her mother left when Ella was 3. It wasn't a bad situation. She just wasn't built for the kind of life I was living at the time. And then after Austin, I came up here and being remote wasn't something she was willing to do. He shrugged, but the shrug had weight in it. Ella's adapted. She's good. But she doesn't have a lot of experience with people who take her work seriously. Her work is serious, Sophia said. I know that. He put the mug down. That's why it matters that you see it. She looked back at Ella, who was adding a date annotation in her careful print, the tip of her tongue slightly visible at the corner of her mouth, the way children held their tongues when concentrating on something that mattered. Sophia had been in 300 meetings with people who held advanced degrees and ran divisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she could count on one hand the number of them who brought this kind of quality to their work. This absolute, unperforming engagement with the thing itself. She's going to be formidable, Sophia said. Yeah, Logan said. She really is. Stud. The board call happened on a Thursday at 9 in the morning, and Logan knew it had gone badly before Sophia said a word about it. He saw it in the time it took her to come out of the room, 20 minutes after the scheduled end of the meeting, which meant either it had run long or she'd needed time afterward to reassemble herself. And given the particular quality of silence that had come from behind the door in the last 10 minutes of the call, he suspected the latter. She came into the kitchen and went directly to the window, the way she went to it when she needed to look at something farther away than the room allowed. "How bad?" he asked. "Not catastrophic," she said, "but not good." She stayed at the window. "There's a faction on the board that wants to exercise the emergency succession clause. It requires a 60-day notice period and a majority vote, and they don't have the majority yet, but they're building toward it." She paused. "One of them, Garrett Lim, he's been on the board since before the Series B. He said something in the meeting that I've been sitting with. He said the company couldn't afford to anchor its future to an uncertain medical outcome." Logan poured her coffee. "That's a hard thing to hear." "It's accurate," she said. "That's the part that makes it hard." She turned from the window. "He's not wrong. From a governance standpoint, leaving operational authority with a CEO in an undefined rehabilitation process is a legitimate risk. I would flag it myself." She took the coffee. "But he said it in the specific way that people say true things when they're using the truth as a weapon. You know what I mean?" "Yeah," Logan said. "I know exactly what you mean." She looked at him. "Have you had that done to you?" "After Austin," he said. "The program director wrote an assessment of my cases that was technically accurate and framed in a way that ended my ability to continue in research contexts." He said it without heat, the way people talked about things that had been worked through to the other side. Everything he wrote was true. The way he arranged it was deliberate. "What did you do?" "Left," he said. "Came here." He looked at her. "I'm not recommending that strategy for your situation." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "Noted." She sat down at the table. She had the documents she'd been reviewing before the call spread across half of it, and she gathered them without looking at what they were, straightening the edges the way you straighten things when you needed your hands to do something while your brain worked. "I need to think about succession planning," she said. "Not because I'm conceding to Lim, because it's the right thing to do regardless." She looked at the documents in her hands. "I've been running the company like it can only function if I'm in the center of it. That was a structural mistake I made before the accident, and I've been too proud to admit it." "Why are you admitting it now?" She considered the question like it deserved consideration. "Because being up here has given me enough distance to see the shape of things. When you're inside the machine, you can't see what the machine actually looks like." She set the documents down. "Ella calls it a Hawkeye view." Logan looked at her. "When did she say that?" "Last week, she was explaining how she spots the patrol hawk from the ridge versus from the cabin." Sophia's voice changed when she talked about Ella. Lost some of the controlled precision, became something warmer and less managed. "She said the higher up you are, the more you see the pattern instead of just the pieces." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's been paying attention." "She's always paying attention," Sophia said. "She just doesn't make a big deal about it." It was Ella who found the folder. Not on purpose. Ella was looking for a charging cable sick. Hers had gone missing, which happened every 3 or 4 days because she was 7 and treated cables as objects of only contingent value. And she'd checked the storage shelf in the hallway where Logan kept miscellaneous equipment. The shelf held a mix of things: physical therapy tools, a spare toolkit, a row of binders, and a manila folder that had slid off a binder and fallen against the wall, face up. Ella, being Ella, looked at it. She didn't read the whole thing. She was 7, and most of the language was professional and dense. But she read the header on the first page, and she read the words Bennett Technologies and Proprietary Rehabilitation Methodology and Commercialization Pathway Q3. And while she didn't understand all of what she was reading, she understood that it had Sophia's name on it, and that it looked important. She brought it to Sophia the same way she brought everything, directly, without drama, as a matter of fact. "I found this on the shelf," she said. "It has your company's name on it." Sophia took it. She didn't start reading immediately. She looked at the folder, at Ella, back at the folder. Then she opened it. Logan was outside when Ella came to find him. He was checking the water line on the north side of the property where a fitting had been leaking since October, crouched in the cold with a wrench and a length of copper pipe. He heard the back door and looked up. Ella was standing on the porch with her coat half buttoned, which told him she'd come out quickly. "Sophia found a folder," she said. He stood up. "What folder?" "It was on the shelf. It had her company name on it. She's reading it." He came inside. Sophia was at the kitchen table. The folder was open in front of her, and she'd been through at least half of it. The pages were spread in the reading order she used when she was processing information fast, right to left, working backward from the end to check the conclusion before she read the argument. Her face was completely still. That stillness was worse than any expression she could have worn. Logan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I can explain what that is." "Let me finish," she said. He waited. She read for another 3 minutes, methodical and silent, turning pages with the kind of care that was the opposite of calm. When she was done, she set the last page down and aligned it with the others and closed the folder. She looked at him. "Marsh brought this," she said. "It's not dated, but the language is prospective. It's a proposal document, not a completed agreement. It outlines a framework for commercializing a neuromotor rehabilitation protocol through a new division of Bennett Technologies, including licensing structure, branding, and a projected valuation based on clinical outcomes." She paused. "The clinical outcomes being mine." "Yes," Logan said. "This was in your house." "Marsh left it," Logan said. "When he came back the second time 3 weeks ago. He didn't tell me what it was. He handed me an envelope with documents he said were for my review and asked me to look at them before the next check-in." "Did you read it?" "Yes." And I told him it wasn't something I was interested in discussing, and I put it on the shelf, and I should have thrown it away or given it back, and I didn't, which was a mistake." She looked at him with the particular expression of someone performing internal adjudication, running the facts, running the variables, reaching a judgment. "You should have told me it existed," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have." "Why didn't you?" He put his hands flat on the table, the gesture of someone who was going to be honest rather than strategic. "Because I didn't want it to complicate what we were doing. The work was going well. You were starting to believe it was possible. I told myself the folder was Marsh's problem, not ours, and I put it away." "That's not your decision to make," she said. "What's mine and what's not mine?" "No," he said. "It's not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you know about this before I arrived? Was this part of the arrangement?" "No," he said. "The arrangement was Elaine's referral. Nothing else. I didn't know Marsh had this document until he handed me the envelope." She studied him. The adjudication was still running. "The proposal references unpublished methodology," she said. "It's specific enough that someone with professional knowledge contributed to drafting it." She paused. "Who else knows the details of the approach you use?" "Nobody currently," Logan said. "But 3 years ago, before Austin, 2 researchers at the clinic knew the framework. One of them left research and went into consulting." He stopped. "His name is Peter Ree. He worked with Elaine Cho's group before he moved to Austin." He looked at the table. "He would know Marsh through the investor circuit. They run in overlapping circles." Sophia looked at him for a long time. "So someone who knows your methodology introduced you to Marsh, or introduced Marsh to your methodology, and Marsh built a commercialization proposal around the possibility that you would succeed with me." "That appears to be what happened," Logan said. "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the pines. The specific sound that had become familiar enough in the past weeks that Logan usually didn't notice it. He noticed it now. "Ella," Sophia said, without changing her tone. Ella, who was standing in the doorway with the careful stillness of a child who knew something important was happening, looked at her. "Can you go to your room for a little bit?" Ella looked at her father. He nodded once. She went. Sophia put both hands on top of the closed folder. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer." "Okay." "Has your interest in my recovery ever been, even partially, about what it could produce beyond my recovery?" The question landed with the weight it was intended to have. Logan felt it, felt the specific quality of it, the way a fair question hurt differently than an unfair one. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it the way she'd asked him to. "No," he said, "not in the way you mean. But I'd be lying if I told you the clinical significance of your case hasn't mattered to me. You have markers I haven't seen before. The specific pattern of your retained signal, if it responds the way I think it can respond, it confirms something I've been working toward for years without being able to prove. That matters to me, as a practitioner." He looked at her steadily. "But what I've been working toward isn't a product. It's an understanding. Those aren't the same thing." "You keep telling me things aren't the same thing," she said, "because they're usually not." She stood the folder on its edge and let it fall flat. "I need to think," she said. "I'd like to be alone for a little while." He stood up. "Sophia, I'm not leaving today," she said. "I'm just thinking, please." He left her the kitchen and the folder and the afternoon light coming through the window she'd made her own, and he went to find Ella Schuckbug. Ella was on her bed with the field guide notebook open, but she wasn't writing in it. She was looking at the ceiling with the specific expression that meant she was doing the kind of internal processing that she hadn't yet learned to hide. Logan sat on the end of the bed. Neither of them said anything for a minute. "Is Sophia mad at you?" Ella asked. "She has a right to be." "Because of the folder?" "Because I had information that was hers, and I made a decision about it that wasn't mine to make." Ella was quiet. Then, "Can you fix it?" "I don't know," he said honestly. She turned her head to look at him. "When I broke Mom's watch by accident, you told me that the most important thing wasn't the watch. It was what I did after." Logan looked at his daughter, this 7-year-old who had retained the exact content of a conversation he'd barely remembered having, who had understood it well enough to apply it now, 3 years later, to a situation that was entirely different and exactly the same. "Yeah," he said. "I said that." "Are you going to do that?" Ella asked. "I'm trying to figure out what that looks like," he said. Ella considered. "Usually it looks like telling the truth about the whole thing, not just the part that makes you look okay." He looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Yeah," he said, "it usually does." Sophia didn't come out for 2 hours. When she did, she came to the session room doorway, not the kitchen. She found Logan there because that's where he went when he needed to do something with his hands and his head at the same time, the same way he went to the water line or the workbench. He was recalibrating the resistance on the equipment they used for trunk work, small adjustments that didn't need doing but gave him something precise to focus on. She stopped in the doorway. "I called Peter Ree," she said. Logan set down the wrench. "How did you find his number?" "I'm a tech CEO. Finding contact information is not a challenge." She moved into the room, stopped near the parallel bars, not holding them, just near them in the way she'd started positioning herself in the room lately, like she owned her proximity to the thing rather than needing it. "He confirmed he drafted the framework for Marsh 6 months ago, before I arrived, before Marsh even contacted Elaine." She paused. "He said he thought you'd be open to it because you'd been working in isolation for years, and the approach needed validation that independent practice couldn't provide." "He was wrong," Logan said. "He knows that now." Her voice was controlled, the kind of controlled that costs something to maintain. "He also told me something I didn't know. He said your work in Austin, the Sandra Reyes case, the case you told me about, the reason it ended the way it did wasn't clinical failure. He said the program director exaggerated the connection between your methodology and the outcome because the program was under pressure to cut costs and you were the most recent hire." She looked at him. "You were set up." Logan was quiet. "Why didn't you say that?" "Because it doesn't matter," he said. "Whatever the director's motivations, Sandra's outcome was real. My role in building her expectations was real." "It matters to me," Sophia said, "because I've spent the last 2 hours trying to decide whether you're someone who uses people or someone who is used, and those are very different things." She stopped. "And apparently you're the second one, and you've been carrying the first one's weight." The room was quiet. A log settled in the wood stove in the hallway, the soft, dense sound of real heat. "The folder still existed," Logan said. "I still should have told you." "Yes," she said, "you should have." She looked at the bars. I'm not leaving. He released a breath. Sophia. I'm not finished, she said. I'm not leaving, but I need something different going forward. I need you to treat me like a partner in this, not a patient. Everything. Data, contacts, documents with my name on them, all of it. I am not someone who needs to be protected from information. I know that, he said. Then act like it. Yes, he said. I will. She held his gaze for a moment, long enough to be certain he meant it, which she was good at assessing. Then she nodded. I'm going to talk to Marsh tomorrow, she said. The proposal is being withdrawn and he understands that, or he finds a new job. My recovery is not a product roadmap and my body is not a proof of concept. She moved toward the door. I'd like to do an evening session if you have the energy for it. He looked at her. You sure? I lost a session to this, she said. I'd like it back. He got up. Give me 10 minutes. Iad. The session that evening was different, not in the mechanics of it. Same bars, same protocol, same data collection. Different in the quality of presence both of them brought to it. Something had been broken and admitted, and the admission had changed the air in the room. Not resolved. Logan knew that things like this didn't resolve in a single conversation, that Sophia would think about the folder for a long time, and some nights it would feel like what it was, but broken open rather than festering, which was the difference between things that healed and things that didn't. She held for 73 seconds, her best number yet. The right thigh reported sensation 4 times, consistent with what he'd been seeing on the left side 3 weeks earlier. When the session ended, she sat in the chair with her hands in her lap and said nothing for a moment. The right side's coming in, Logan said. He said it simply, as a data point. I know, she said. I felt it during. That's new. I know that too. She looked at her hands, then up at him. When Ella found the folder, she stopped. She brought it to me immediately. No calculation, no decision about whether to say something. She just brought it straight to me. That's how she operates. I know. Sophia paused. She's the best person in this house. Logan smiled, a real one, the kind that didn't happen on the surface of his face, but started somewhere deeper. She'd tell you that's not a high bar. She'd be wrong, Sophia said. She started moving toward the door, then stopped. Logan, thank you for telling me the truth tonight, not just the convenient part. He thought about Ella on the bed, about the watch he hadn't remembered telling her about the particular wisdom of people who hadn't yet learned to complicate honesty. Somebody reminded me how that was supposed to work, he said. Sophia looked at him for a moment, then glanced down the hallway toward the soft light coming from under Ella's door. She's going to be something, Sophia said quietly. She already is. She went to bed, and Logan stayed in the session room for a while, standing in the dark with the window showing the Montana night outside. Cold, absolute, the kind of dark that had no pollution in it, just stars doing the only thing stars did, which was shine without needing to be watched. He stood there until the cold came through the glass, and then he went and knocked on Ella's door. Still awake? He asked. A little bit. He opened the door. She was in bed with the wolf pajamas, the rabbit with one ear on the pillow next to her head. Is Sophia okay? Ella asked. She's going to be, he said. Are you? Ella thought about it. I didn't do anything wrong by showing her the folder, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. You didn't. Okay. She settled into her pillow. Dad? Yeah. I think Sophia's going to stay. He looked at her. What makes you say that? Ella's eyes were already going toward sleep, the way children's eyes did, quickly, without ceremony. Because she knows where the afternoon light is now, she said. People don't learn where the light is if they're planning to leave. He stayed in the doorway until her breathing changed. Then he went and turned off the kitchen light and stood at the window for one more minute, watching the tree line, thinking about signal and noise and the specific things that got built in the dark without anyone seeing them form. The folder was gone from the kitchen table the next morning. Sophia had put it somewhere. Logan didn't ask where because it wasn't his to ask about anymore. What remained was the conversation, which sat between them for the first few days after like weather that hadn't fully passed. Present in the slight formality of their morning exchanges, in the way they occupied the session room with a little more deliberate professionalism than they had before the folder existed. It wasn't cold. It was careful. There was a difference, and both of them knew the difference, and neither of them pushed through it faster than it wanted to move. The sessions continued. The data continued its uneven, stubborn, genuine progress. Right side sensation was establishing itself the way the left side had 6 weeks earlier, inconsistently at first, then with growing regularity, the geography filling in like a map being drawn from the inside out. Logan tracked it without comment, and Sophia reported it without drama, and the yellow pad filled with numbers that told a story. Neither of them narrated aloud because narrating it felt like the wrong kind of attention. Marsh called twice, and both times Sophia took the call in her room and came out afterward with the compressed expression she wore when she'd handled something she hadn't enjoyed handling. The commercialization proposal was formally withdrawn. Logan didn't ask for the details. She didn't offer them. That chapter had been turned, and they both understood it was turned. What filled the space the folder had occupied was something simpler and harder to name. It was in the evenings mostly, after Ella's bedtime, after the router cut off at 9, and the cabin got quiet in the particular way that cabins in Montana got quiet in deep winter. Not silent, because the wood stove talked and the wind talked and the building itself made the small sounds of something holding together against cold, but removed from the world outside in a way that created its own kind of intimacy. The two of them at the kitchen table, or Logan at the workbench and Sophia in the chair she'd pulled to the doorway, far enough to give him space and close enough to talk if one of them had something to say. They talked about Austin more than Logan had anticipated. Not all at once. In pieces, the way you disclose things you'd held for a long time, a little at a time, testing whether the telling made it worse or better. He told her about Sandra Reyes, not just the way he'd told it the first time, but further in. The specific session where he'd seen the plateau and chosen not to name it directly because the team had a conference presentation in 3 weeks, and the program director had already included Sandra's case in the abstract. He'd told himself the plateau was normal variation. He'd believed it mostly, but he'd also not been wrong about the presentation, and that not wrongness was the thing he couldn't fully forgive himself for. Sophia listened the way she listened to things that mattered, without interjecting, without the surface empathy that was really just waiting for a turn to speak. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You made a judgment call under institutional pressure," she said, "and the judgment was wrong. That's different from what you've been treating it as." "What have I been treating it as?" "A character verdict," she said, "like it proved something essential about who you are, rather than a mistake made in a specific context by someone who was also human, and also under pressure, and also afraid of what the plateau meant." He looked at her. "You're very precise about this particular thing." "I've been dismantling my own character verdicts for the last several months," she said. "I recognize the architecture." He turned his water glass. "What are yours?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. "That I built the company by understanding things other people missed," she said. "Pattern recognition, signal and noise, finding the insight before anyone else found it. That was my identity. The accident didn't just take my mobility. It took the evidence that I was that person. I couldn't see patterns clearly when I was in pain and on medication and trying to manage the board and manage Marsh and manage my own terror. I made poor decisions. I said things in meetings I shouldn't have said. I missed things I wouldn't have missed before." She paused. "And I decided that meant the person I'd been was gone, that the accident had taken her with it." "And now?" Logan asked. "Now I think I was doing what you did," she said, "letting a verdict from the worst conditions stand as the permanent truth." She looked at her hands on the table. "Ella said something last week. She said that when the hawk flies in the storm, it looks different from when it flies in the clear. But it's the same hawk." Logan looked at her. "She's 7. "She's something else entirely," Sophia said. "Don't sell her short by calling her 7. He smiled. "Not the contained version, the real one. She'd be unbearable if she knew how good she was." "She already knows," Sophia said. "She's just polite about it." The shift in the work happened in week 9, and it happened the way significant things happened in Logan's experience. Not with announcement, but with a quality of difference in the room that you felt before you could measure it. Sophia was at the bars. Standard protocol. except that Logan had introduced a modification 3 sessions earlier. Instead of the lateral pressure assessment being applied by him, he was teaching her to generate the intentional signal herself, directing her attention to the specific muscle group and attempting voluntary contraction without expecting visible movement. The purpose was to rehearse the pathway, keep it active, build the neurological habit of use rather than dormancy. She'd been doing it for 3 sessions with variable results. Today she was in the 40-second hold, and Logan was standing at the side logging data when he saw it. Her left hip shifted. Not a compensation movement, not a gravitational drift. An actual lateral shift, small and incomplete and unmistakable. He wrote it down. He didn't say anything. She felt it at approximately the same moment. He could tell by the quality of her stillness. It went from the stillness of concentration to the stillness of someone who has received information they don't yet trust. "Did I?" she started. "Keep the hold," he said. "Don't think about it. Just hold." She held. 30 more seconds. When she finally let the arms take the weight and settled back, she looked at him. "Tell me," she said. He turned the pad around and showed her the notation. L-hip lateral shift, voluntary, approximately 8 millimeters, duration approximately 3 seconds, 9:42 a.m. She read it again. She was doing the thing she did with information that was large, processing it twice, once for content and once for implication. 8 millimeters, she said. "It's small." "It's movement," she said. Her voice was level, completely level. But her hands, resting on the bars, had tightened. "It's voluntary movement," he said. "That's specific. That's different from reflexive response or positional drift. You generated that." The silence between them had a weight to it that was different from other silences in this room. She was looking at the notation like she was committing it to memory, which she probably was. "What do we do with it?" she asked. "We do what we always do," he said. "We log it. We replicate the conditions. We see if it's consistent or if it was a single event. And we don't tell anyone outside this room until we have a pattern." She looked up. "You're not excited." "I'm very excited," he said. "I'm experienced at not showing it." Something cracked open in her face then. Not tears, not quite, but the near thing, the presence of tears behind composure that showed itself in the jaw and the eyes, without breaking through. She turned back to face the bars, and he understood she needed the forward orientation, the absence of direct eye contact, to have the moment privately. "Set me up again," she said, her voice almost steady. "You need a minute." "I need to do it again," she said. "Please." He set her up again. The second attempt produced nothing. The nervous system didn't perform on demand. It performed when conditions were right, and the conditions included a quality of calm she didn't quite have in this particular moment. He logged the absence without comment. The third attempt produced a twitch, incomplete, possibly intentional, possibly not. He logged it as ambiguous. After the session, she sat in the chair for a while without moving toward the door. He sat on the stool and didn't push. 8 years ago, she said finally, I was living in a studio apartment in San Jose. I was running the company out of a co-working space, and the company was 3 people including me, and we were 40 days from running out of runway. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat a full meal. I spent most of that period feeling like I was standing on ice that was cracking under me. What happened? We closed the bridge round on day 38, she said, and I remember thinking, I remember the specific thought, that I would never again be as afraid as I'd been in those 40 days, that I'd been through the worst thing. She paused. That seems naive now. It's not naive, he said. You just didn't know what the inventory looked like yet. She looked at him. Is that what you'd call it? An inventory? The hard things, he said. You don't know going in how many there are or what they cost. You find out as you go. She was quiet for a moment. 8 millimeters, she said again, quieter. Yeah, that's something on the inventory. It is, he said, a different kind of something. She told Ella that evening, which Logan hadn't expected and probably should have. He was in the kitchen when he heard Sophia's voice from the living room, the unguarded version, the one that didn't calibrate. And then Ella's response, sharp and immediate, the sound of a child receiving news she'd been waiting for. He stayed in the kitchen. What he heard, in pieces. Sophia's explanation, careful but real, not oversimplifying but not overpromising. Ella asking what 8mm looked like. Sophia saying she'd show her in the session room tomorrow if Logan said it was okay. Ella asking if it meant Sophia was going to walk. Sophia saying she didn't know yet, which was honest. Ella saying, but it means you could. Sophia, after a pause, it means it's possible. That's not nothing. Ella, Dad always says possible is where everything starts. Logan set down the dish he was washing and stood at the sink for a moment. He hadn't said that in front of Ella recently enough for her to be attributing it to a current context. She'd been carrying that sentence around from somewhere, some conversation he didn't specifically remember, and produced it now in exactly the right place. 7 years old, and she had the instincts of someone who'd been paying attention for much longer. He finished the dishes and went to the doorway. Ella was sitting on the floor near Sophia's chair, the field guide notebook open on her lap, and she was drawing something. The hawk, he thought, the patrol hawk, though he couldn't see clearly. Sophia was watching her draw with the expression she got when she forgot she was being observed, something open and unguarded that the controlled professional version of Sophia Bennett had no access to. How do you draw the wing gap? Sophia asked, without it looking like damage. You draw the intention first, Ella said, the shape of where it's going. Then the gap is just what's missing from that shape. It's still the wing. Logan leaned against the doorframe. Nobody said anything for a while, and the silence was the kind that didn't need filling. The replication came 4 days later. Then again, 2 days after that. By the third occurrence, Logan had enough consistency to change the notation from possible voluntary to voluntary without qualification. And when he showed Sophia the revised notation, she looked at it for a long time and then handed the pad back without saying anything, which told him more than any words would have. The movement was still small. He was honest about that. 8 to 12mm, left hip, lateral plane, under specific intentional conditions. It was not walking. It was not the dramatic reversal of injury that headlines were made of. It was a signal, intact and genuine, that the system was more capable than the MRI had shown and that the work had reached it. What it meant beyond that was a question Logan wouldn't answer and Sophia had learned not to ask. What it did, in practice, was change the quality of Sophia's presence in her own body, something subtle and real. The way she positioned herself in the chair, the way she held her trunk in the bars, the way she talked about her legs in conversation. Before, even in the better sessions, there had been a remove in her language, a careful separation between my legs and I, as though the lower half of her body were a foreign territory she was navigating diplomatically. It was gone now, or mostly gone. The territory had sent back a signal, and the signal had been received. Logan noticed it. He logged it in a way he didn't log clinical data, privately, without notation, as something he simply knew. Ella noticed it too, in her way. You touched your knee today, she said to Sophia one evening, entirely matter-of-fact. Sophia looked up. What? While you were on the phone. You put your hand on your knee and kept it there for a while. Ella was finishing an entry in the field guide. You didn't used to do that. Sophia looked at her hand, then at Ella. Observant, she said. Field work, Ella said, without looking up. The call from the board came on a Thursday evening, outside the scheduled window, which meant someone was moving fast on something. Sophia took it in her room and came out 45 minutes later looking like she'd navigated a minefield. She found Logan at the workbench in the session room. He looked up. Garrett Lim is calling an emergency session, she said. He has enough votes. Logan set down the tool. For the succession clause? For a formal review, she said. Not succession, yet, but a formal governance review of my capacity to serve as CEO, which is the first procedural step toward succession if they want to go that way. She was in the doorway, not fully in the room, which was unlike her. She'd claimed this room weeks ago. They want me in San Francisco. When? 2 weeks. She paused. In person. Garrett specifically requested in person. He wants the board to see me, which means he wants them to see the chair. She said it without self-pity, with the flat accuracy of someone reading a tactical situation. He thinks it's his strongest card. Logan leaned against the workbench. Is it? It depends on what they see when they see me, she said. If they see what I was 4 months ago, yes. If they see what I am now, she stopped. I don't know what I am now. I can tell you what the data says. Tell me. The data says you've developed measurable voluntary motor function in two muscle groups that were non-responsive at intake. Bilateral sensation is present and improving in both lower extremities. Trunk control is significantly above baseline, and your proprioceptive awareness has improved enough to change your postural mechanics without coaching. He paused. You're not where you started. That's what the data says. Can I walk into that boardroom? She asked. He was quiet. Logan. Not yet, he said. Not 2 weeks from now. She absorbed that. But I can do something. You can stand, he said. With the bars, briefly. Without the bars, he weighed it carefully. Possibly, with support, with significant preparation. He looked at her. What do you want to show them? I want to show them that I'm functional, she said, that the person making decisions for Bennett Technologies is capable. She paused. I don't want to perform for them. I'm not going to stand up in a boardroom and prove I'm worth keeping because I can manage a few seconds upright. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She thought about it. That I'm the right person for the job, regardless of what my legs are doing. She moved into the room fully, stopped near the bars. The mobility is mine. It's not the board's. Whether I stand or sit in that room isn't their data point to use. That's the right instinct, he said. I know it's the right instinct, she said. I'm asking whether it's the right strategy. He looked at her. What does your CTO say? Marcus says the numbers support me. Revenue is up 7%, the product roadmap is solid, and the two major partnerships I signed before the accident are both ahead of schedule. Garrett Lim's issue is not operational. It's personal. He's never believed a company this size should be run by someone under 35, and the accident gave him a legitimate process to use. She paused. What I need in that room is to be more myself than he expects, more in control than the chair suggests I am. The board needs to see that the accident changed my circumstances, but not my judgment. Your judgment is sharper than when you arrived, Logan said. She looked at him. How would you know? Because you're making fewer decisions from a place of fear, he said. What you did with Marsh, the folder, you didn't overreact and you didn't let it go. You measured it and you handled it precisely. He paused. 4 months ago, when you first got out of that SUV, your judgment was good. But it was running on threat response. Fight or don't lose. Now it's running on something cleaner. She was quiet for a moment. That's either a clinical observation or a personal one. Both, he said. Probably. She looked at the bars, then at him. I'm going to need to prepare. I know. Double sessions the next 2 weeks, if your body holds it. It'll hold it, she said. It wasn't bravado. It was the statement of someone who had accumulated 2.5 months of evidence about what her body could do when given the right conditions. He nodded. Then we start tomorrow. But the 2 weeks were the hardest work they'd done. Not because Logan pushed her beyond capacity. He was precise about the line between productive stress and damage, and he held it. But because Sophia was pushing herself in a way that was new, driving the sessions from inside rather than from discipline alone. She was chasing something specific now, and specificity changed the quality of effort. She fell twice in the second week. The first time was in the bars, a loss of balance during a new weight-shifting drill, a lateral tip that she caught with her arms and recovered cleanly, more startled than hurt. She held still for a moment after, and Logan held still too, and then she said, "Again," and he reset the drill. The second time was worse. She was attempting unassisted standing, Logan close but not touching, 2 feet away, the agreement being that she would reach for him if she needed to, and he would step in if the fall started. And the standing lasted 11 seconds before her right hip gave and she went down sideways. Logan caught her before the floor, barely, the two of them ending up in an undignified tangle against the lower parallel bar, her arm across his shoulder, his hand at her side where the hip had gone. They stayed like that for a moment, close and inelegant. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. He helped her upright, moved her back to the chair, stepped back. His heart rate was elevated. He didn't say that. She was looking at the floor, not with defeat. More like recalibration, the internal version of what she did when she read something twice. 11 seconds, he said. That's real. It ended on the floor. It started standing, he said. We work with both. She looked up. His face was closer than it had been in most of their sessions. The fall had redistributed the distance, and she held the eye contact for a moment that lasted a beat longer than functional. Thank you, she said, for catching me. That's the job, he said. No, she said, it's not. The job would be standing clear and logging the fall. She paused. You stepped in. He didn't have an answer for that. He stepped back to his regular position and picked up the yellow pad and wrote down the time. About out. 3 days before she left for San Francisco, Ella asked her directly whether she was coming back. They were at the kitchen table, late afternoon, the good light, the place that had become theirs in the way places became things when people inhabited them long enough. Ella was doing homework with the focused reluctance of a child who had better things to do but understood the necessity. Sophia was reviewing the presentation she'd be delivering to the board. The question came without preamble, the way Ella's questions always came. Are you coming back after San Francisco? Sophia looked up. What do you think? I think you are, Ella said. But I want to hear it. I'm coming back, Sophia said. Ella looked at her steadily, measuring the answer the way her father measured data, looking for signal, not just content. Promise? Yes, Sophia said. I promise. Ella nodded and returned to her homework, apparently satisfied. Sophia watched her for a moment, the bent head, the pencil working, the rabbit tucked against her backpack, and felt something in her chest that she didn't immediately have a word for. She'd built a company. She'd managed hundreds of people. She'd made decisions that moved markets and structured agreements that would still be running years after she'd moved on from the deals themselves. She'd been, she believed, good at the things that counted. She had not understood until 7 weeks ago how much she'd missed by not being in a room with someone small who asked direct questions and named hawks and drew wing gaps carefully so the drawing showed intention rather than damage. She turned back to the presentation, changed the opening. Took out a paragraph Marsh had suggested that framed her rehabilitation as a productivity story and replaced it with 3 sentences of her own, plain, accurate, without performance. She read it back. It sounded like herself. That was, she thought, the correct starting point. The night before she left, Logan was at the workbench and Sophia found him there, which was where she always found him when something was unfinished. I've been thinking about Sandra Reyes, she said. He looked up. Yeah? You said her husband wrote to you 6 months after, she said, that she was doing okay. Yeah. Did you ever write back? He was quiet for a moment. No. Why not? He turned the tool in his hand. Because I didn't think I had the right. She looked at him. She's the reason you practice quietly, she said. She's the reason you don't publish. She's the reason you're up here in the mountains doing work that almost nobody knows about. She paused. She's been living in the outcome of what happened, and so have you, and her husband told you she was okay, and you didn't answer because you were still in your verdict. Logan didn't say anything. Right back, Sophia said. Not for you, because he reached out and he deserved a response. He looked at her for a long moment. That's direct. I'm a direct person, she said. I know. He set the tool down. I know you are. She moved toward the door, then stopped. I'm going to be okay in that room, she said. I want you to know that, not because I'm not nervous, but because I know who I am now in a way I didn't 4 months ago. She looked back at him. That's yours, some of it. I want you to know I know that. He looked at her, this woman who had arrived in a black SUV in a November snowstorm, who had sat in his parking lot for 40 minutes and come out ready to negotiate, who had thrown a clipboard in a rehabilitation facility and discharged herself and driven through 5 states to find an answer nobody in credentialed medicine would give her, who had learned where the afternoon light was, who had caught herself in the moment after 8 millimeters of voluntary movement and asked to do it again immediately. You did the work, he said. We did the work. she said. There's a difference. She went to bed. He stayed at the bench for a while, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling into night, and thought about what she'd said about Sandra Reyes, and about the difference between a verdict and a truth. Then he opened his laptop and found an old email thread and began to type. She came back on a Sunday. Logan knew she was coming because she'd texted the night before. Not an arrival time, just tomorrow. Road should be clear. He'd read it twice the way he read things that mattered, and then set his phone down and gone to finish dinner, and Ella had looked at him across the table with the expression that said she already knew without being told, because Ella always already knew. The SUV appeared at the bottom of the access road at just after 2 in the afternoon. Different vehicle this time. Not the black one that Marsh had driven in November, but a smaller rental, gray, practical. She drove it herself. That was the first thing he noticed. She'd been driving since the accident, he knew. Hand controls, which she'd had installed and learned in the early months of rehabilitation, the specific adaptation of someone who refused to be rearranged by her circumstances more than absolutely necessary. But he hadn't seen her drive before. There was something in the fact of it, in the sight of her parking that gray car with the same confident efficiency she brought to everything, that landed differently than he'd expected. Ella was off the porch before the engine stopped. She stood at a respectful distance while Sophia got herself out. The transfer to the chair, efficient and practiced, the specific sequence of movements she'd refined over months. And then Ella said, from 5 feet away, "You're back," with the gravity of a statement rather than the obvious observation it technically was. "I'm back," Sophia said. Ella stepped forward and hugged her, which was not something she'd done when Sophia left. It was brief and contained, the hug of a child who was serious about things, and then she stepped back and looked at Sophia's face with her field researcher attention. "Did it go okay?" Ella asked. "It went," Sophia said. "Come inside and I'll tell you." Logan was on the porch. Sophia looked up at him as she came up the ramp, and they held the look for a moment. The particular look of two people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it and know the other person knows it without having to say anything about it. "Hayes," she said. "Bennett," he said. "I kept my job," she said. He let out a breath he'd been holding longer than he'd admitted to himself. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She came through the door. Garrett Lim resigned at the end of the meeting, which I didn't see coming. Apparently 3 other board members had been waiting for someone to go first. She wheeled to the kitchen table with the ease of someone coming home to a place she knew, which she was. The numbers made the argument I didn't have to make out loud. Marcus had everything prepared. The board saw a company that was running well and a CEO who showed up knowing exactly what she was talking about. She paused. And I didn't perform for anyone. I sat at that table and I was exactly what I am now. And it was enough. "It was always enough," Logan said. "I know that now," she said. "I didn't know it when I left." Ella was already putting the kettle on because she'd learned in the last months that this was what you did when someone came back from something hard. And Logan looked at his daughter and thought, not for the first time, that she'd learned things living in this cabin that no school had taught her and that no circumstance had fully explained. Things she'd arrived at through the specific combination of paying close attention and not being afraid to feel them. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Tell me the whole thing." So she did. The board meeting had lasted 4 hours, which was 2 hours longer than scheduled, which was a sign of either disaster or decisive resolution, and turned out to be the latter. Garrett Lim had entered the room prepared to conduct what he'd framed to 3 other board members as a performance review, the kind that had a conclusion already decided and a process built around manufacturing legitimacy for that conclusion. Sophia had recognized the architecture in the first 10 minutes. She'd seen it before, from the other side, years earlier, when she'd had to let a VP go who'd been building a similar structure under a different vice president, the kind of political machinery that people built when they didn't believe direct confrontation would work in their favor. She'd let Garrett go first. He'd presented the case, framed around fiduciary responsibility, around the duration and uncertainty of her recovery, around the need for stable operational leadership during a critical growth period. It was professionally done. She didn't interrupt. She'd made a note on her legal pad that said good construction and underlined it, which was the note of someone who respected the quality of the thing coming at them even while they were preparing to dismantle it. Then she'd presented her own case, not a rebuttal. She'd learned from Logan that the data should stand on its own rather than being arranged against something else, that defensive framing contaminated the data it was trying to support. She'd walked the board through 17 months of operational metrics, the product roadmap, the partnership structures, the team retention numbers, the 2 acquisitions she'd evaluated and declined, and why those declinations had been correct. She'd been precise, and she'd been undefended, which was different from undefensive. She'd let the board see her as she actually was, rather than as a managed projection of what she needed them to believe. And then she'd said something she hadn't planned to say. "I've spent the last 4 months," she'd told them, "learning to pay attention to signals I'd trained myself to ignore." That's both a clinical statement and a professional one. The accident didn't take my judgment, it corrected my relationship with it. She'd looked at each of them in turn. The habit of a woman who understood that eye contact was a form of accountability. "I'm not the CEO I was 18 months ago. I'm a better one. And I think you deserve to know that rather than simply observe it, so I'm telling you directly." Garrett Lim had asked 2 more questions after that, and then he'd looked at his portfolio binder for a long moment. And then he'd said, to the room rather than to Sophia specifically, that he thought it was time to step back from the board and allow the company's leadership to continue without the distraction of his reservations. 3 others had gone with him. Not in solidarity, in relief, she thought. He'd been the one who made the dynamic possible, and his absence dissolved it. "How did you feel?" Logan asked. She considered the question. "Tired," she said. "Mostly tired, and clear. Like after a long session when the work is finished and you know you did the right thing, not because it felt good, but because it was the right thing." "That's a good kind of tired," he said. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Ella brought the tea. She put it down in front of Sophia with the careful gravity she brought to things she'd decided mattered. And then she sat in her own chair and tucked her feet up and looked at Sophia with the patient, open attention that had become one of the consistent textures of this cabin, something you could count on finding here. "Did you miss it?" Ella asked. "While you were gone." Sophia looked at her. "Miss what?" Ella gestured with one small hand. "At the table, the window, the room, at the general territory of the cabin and its contents." "Yes," Sophia said. "I missed it." Ella nodded, satisfied. She opened the field guide notebook to the current page. "Victor was here yesterday," she said, "near the eastern ridge. I got good observations." "Tell me," Sophia said, and Ella told her. And outside, the Montana sky was doing the thing it did in late winter, sitting low and pale and enormous above the tree line. And the kettle made small sounds of heat, and the cabin smelled like pine and wood and something human. And Sophia Bennett sat at the kitchen table in her chair with tea she'd grown to actually like, and listened to a 7-year-old describe the flight behavior of a rough-tailed hawk with a gap in his left wing, and felt, without performance and without qualification, at home. The foundation idea came from Sophia, but it became something larger than either of them through a conversation that neither of them had planned to have. It was late February. The progress in the sessions had continued in the specific uneven way that progress always continued. Some weeks dramatic, some plateaued, some retreating slightly before advancing again. The voluntary movement in the left hip was now consistent and measurable. The right side was beginning to show similar patterns. Logan had started introducing new drills that required bilateral coordination, things she hadn't attempted in the first 2 months because the infrastructure hadn't been there. She was standing, not just in the bars, though the bar work had evolved significantly, the minutes accumulating, the quality of the stance becoming something that looked less like endurance and more like possession. But standing with a single point of support, a modified cane, custom-built by Logan from materials he'd ordered and adapted, light and precise, designed for the specific mechanical profile of her current function rather than the generic accommodation of a standard aid. She'd taken 11 steps with it the previous Thursday. 11 actual steps, assisted but not supported, the weight moving through her body in the specific sequence that walking required, the nervous system executing something it hadn't executed in 5 months. Logan had counted them aloud without meaning to. The numbers coming out of him involuntarily, the one concession to feeling he'd allowed himself in all the months of careful data keeping. And she'd heard the count in his voice, and it had told her something about what the moment cost him to witness. They didn't discuss the 11 steps directly. That was one of their unspoken agreements. Some things were allowed to exist without being analyzed, because analysis at the wrong moment was a way of putting distance between yourself and an experience that deserved to be felt first and understood later. The foundation came up sideways, the way the best ideas usually did. She'd been on the phone with a journalist, a technology writer for a publication she respected, someone who'd covered Bennett Technologies fairly and without the breathless sensationalism that some outlets brought to stories about young women running large companies. The journalist had asked, in the context of a broader profile, what the accident had changed about how she thought about her work. She'd said something unrehearsed. She'd said, "The most valuable thing I've built in the last 4 months has no revenue model." She hadn't planned to say it. It came from somewhere below the prepared answer, from the part of her that had been quietly reorganizing itself since November. She'd finished the interview and sat with the sentence afterward, and that evening at the kitchen table she'd told Logan what she'd said, and he'd looked at her and then looked at the wall, and she could see him thinking, which was a thing she'd learned to recognize. The particular quality of Logan Hayes' thinking was a stillness that wasn't vacant, a quality of internal processing that was more active than his external appearance suggested. "There are people who can't afford what you've had," he said. Not as an accusation, as a data point. "I know that," she said. "I've been thinking about it since I got here." She looked at her tea. "The first 3 specialists I saw, all 3 charged between $15,000 and $25,000 for a 6-week program. The 4th was covered by insurance, but at a facility where the patient-to-therapist ratio was 12-1. She paused. "What you do here requires time and attention that the current system doesn't fund." "The current system funds outcomes it can measure quickly," Logan said. "And outcomes it can measure quickly in spinal cord rehab tend to be functional independence metrics. Whether someone can live at home without a full-time aide, not whether someone can walk." "Because walking takes too long," she said. "Because walking takes too long and costs too much and isn't guaranteed." He turned his water glass. "The insurance math doesn't work for the kind of program I run. You stay too long. The sessions are too frequent. The approach is too individualized to scale in the way that reimbursement models require." "What if the model was different?" she said. "What if the funding didn't come from insurance?" He looked at her. "A nonprofit," she said, "not a business. No revenue model, no investor expectations, no product story built around patient outcomes." She was thinking out loud now, the way she thought through problems she cared about, not building toward a predetermined conclusion, but actually exploring the shape of the thing. Endowed, foundation funded, with enough operational runway to work the way you work, with patients who have no other access, people who can't afford the programs that might help them, people who've been told the timeline is too long and the outcome too uncertain for the system to support. Logan was quiet for a long time. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "I know what significant undertakings look like," she said. "I've built one." She looked at him. "I'm not saying I do it alone. I'm not saying you direct it alone. I'm saying we think about what it could be. Together. If that's something you're willing to consider." He looked at her steadily. "Why?" "Because what you do deserves to exist beyond this cabin," she said. "And because the system that failed me and Sandra Reyes and everyone before us who got a probability range instead of a real attempt, that system isn't going to fix itself." She paused. "I can't fix it either, but I can build something next to it, something that works differently for the people it can't reach." He was quiet again. She waited. "Ella would have to be okay with it," he said finally. "This place, the way we live. She's built her life in it. I'm not changing that without her." "Ask her," Sophia said. Ella's answer, delivered the following morning at breakfast with the focused seriousness she brought to important questions, was, "Would I still have my room?" "Your room would be permanent," Sophia said. "That's non-negotiable." Ella considered. "Would there be other kids?" "Patients have families," Sophia said. "Some families have kids." Ella thought about this. "I could show them the field guide," she said, "and the patrol hawk." "You could," Sophia said. Ella looked at her father. I think it's a good idea, she said. Victor shows up more when there are more people watching. Logan looked at his daughter, then at Sophia, then at his coffee mug, because sometimes you needed a moment to look at something ordinary when something around you was becoming extraordinary. Okay, he said. Let's think about what it looks like. What it looked like, over the following 8 months, was difficult and unglamorous, and nothing like the clean narrative that foundation launch announcements were written in. There were zoning arguments with the county about the facility expansion. There was a disagreement between Logan and the first medical consultant Sophia hired that was loud enough that Ella came to the doorway of the session room and asked if she needed to get someone, which broke the tension because both adults stopped arguing to tell her no and then felt the absurdity of the argument simultaneously and couldn't recover the heat of it. There was the week in May when the contractor they'd hired to convert the barn structure into the primary rehabilitation space discovered that the foundation needed work before any building above it could be meaningfully added to, which added 6 weeks and a significant cost overrun that Sophia handled by calling a foundation donor she'd been saving for a different campaign and being entirely honest about what had gone wrong and why, which was the only kind of conversation she had now. There was the patient intake question, which turned into a weeks-long discussion about criteria and philosophy that was really a discussion about what they believed the work was for, who deserved the time and attention of what they were building, and whether deserve was even the right framework, and what the alternatives were if it wasn't. There was the night in June when Logan sat at the kitchen table at midnight going through the 5th revision of the clinical protocol with a red pen, and Sophia came in because she couldn't sleep and found him there and looked at the marked-up pages spread across the table and said, "How bad is it?" "Not bad," he said. "Just not right yet." She sat down. "What's wrong with it?" He turned the top page around so she could read. She read. She made 2 observations that were correct and one that was brilliant in the specific way that outsider intelligence was sometimes brilliant, coming at the problem from a direction that professional training had foreclosed. He made a note. She went and got her laptop, and they worked until 3 in the morning, and when they stopped, the protocol was better. There was also the morning in July when Ella came running in from outside to report that Victor had been spotted on the new fence post, the one installed for the expanded facility boundary, which she interpreted as an endorsement. "That's a significant data point," Sophia said. "I wrote it in the field guide," Ella said, "under positive indicators." Logan looked at the ceiling. "That's not a scientific category." "It is in my system," Ella said. Muffs. The first anniversary of the center's opening fell on a Saturday in early November, a year after everything had started, and the morning came in gray and cold and ordinary, which was the kind of morning that significant days usually arrived on because significance didn't announce itself in advance. There were 40 people at the event, not a gala. Sophia had been emphatic about that, to the frustration of the publicist she'd brought in for the occasion, who had lobbied for a venue in Missoula and a proper program and donors in formal wear. What they had instead was a gathering at the center itself, which occupied the converted barn and the original session room, and a new addition that had finally cleared its inspection in September. Patients, families, the small staff they'd assembled, a few journalists who'd been covering the center since the announcement, a handful of the donors who'd funded the first 2 years. Sandra Reyes was there. She'd come with her husband David, who had the warm and careful quality of a man who'd spent years learning to watch for the specific signs that his wife was approaching her limits and how to manage those signs without her knowing he was managing them. Sandra was in a power wheelchair, significantly more function than when Logan had last seen her years ago, the result of different programs over different years and the specific stubborn continuation of a woman who'd never actually accepted the ceiling she'd been given. She was 47 now. She looked at Logan when she arrived with the particular look of someone who had been carrying a conversation for years and was finally in the same room to finish it. They talked for 20 minutes, near the window of the center's main room, low enough that nobody around them could hear. Logan did not summarize the conversation to anyone afterward. What mattered was that it happened, and that both of them came away from it standing in a different place than the one they'd occupied for 6 years. David shook Logan's hand on the way out, at the end of the day, and said, "She's glad she came," in the voice of someone who meant more than that sentence. "Tell her I am too," Logan said. The moment that everyone would talk about afterward, that the journalist who wrote the piece would lead with, that the donors would mention to other donors, that Ella would record in the field guide under positive indicators with significantly more detail than her usual entries, happened at 4 in the afternoon. The program had been simple: brief remarks from Sophia, brief remarks from the lead therapist they'd hired, a presentation by one of the center's first patients. Then the kind of informal gathering that allowed the people in the room to actually talk to each other rather than perform a ceremony. Sophia had given her remarks from the chair. She'd made the decision about that deliberately, the way she made most decisions now, not as capitulation to circumstance, but as a choice about what she was communicating and to whom. She'd built this center as a person in a wheelchair. She'd built it while doing the work that the center existed to do. The chair was part of the story, and she wasn't going to perform around it. But she'd also, over the last 6 months, been doing something with the cane. Privately, with Logan, in the sessions that continued 3 times a week alongside everything else they were building. The 11 steps had become 30. 30 had become 70. Interrupted, imperfect, frequently requiring the cane and occasionally not. The right side had caught up to the left, not fully, not cleanly, but enough that bilateral weight-bearing was possible under controlled conditions for periods of time that had been unthinkable a year ago. She hadn't performed this for anyone. That had been deliberate too. Not out of the fear of expectation that Logan had warned her about with Sandra, but out of the understanding that some things were hers before they were anyone else's, that recovery was not a public story until the person recovering chose to make it one. She talked to Logan about it the week before the anniversary, not as a clinical discussion. They'd moved past purely clinical discussions months ago into the territory of 2 people who knew each other and could speak to each other that way. There are 40 people coming, she'd said, people who gave money to this because they believed it could work. Patients who came here because they needed to believe someone thought recovery was worth trying for. She'd looked at him. I've been thinking about whether there's something I want to show them. He'd looked back at her without performance. What do you want to show them? Not a miracle, she said immediately. Not a before and after. Not a story that makes the disability neat or the recovery complete because it isn't complete. And the story that pretends it is does damage to the people in the room who are early in the work and need honest examples, not inspirational ones. She paused. But something real, something that's mine that I choose to share, not because I owe it to anyone, but because I want to. Then do it, he said. On your terms. No countdown, no announcement, no building it up. Just a moment, she said. Just a moment, he agreed. So at 4 in the afternoon, while the gathering was in the informal phase, while people were talking and the journalists had their notebooks open, and Ella was somewhere near the back explaining the field guide to the 12-year-old daughter of one of the donors with the authority of a naturalist conducting a seminar, Sophia moved her chair to the open area near the center's main window, the one that looked out toward the ridgeline where the patrol hawk had been spotted twice that week. And she picked up the cane that had been leaning against the wall, and she stood up. It wasn't clean. It took 2 attempts to get the weight distributed correctly, and the second attempt required more visible effort than she'd have chosen if she'd had a choice. And Logan was 3 feet away, not touching her, and also not pretending not to be ready if she needed him, which was how he was always positioned now. She stood. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It fell silent in a wave, the way silence moved through a space when people at the edges noticed something and stopped talking to look, and the noticing spread inward until the whole room was quiet without anyone deciding to make it quiet. She held it for 4 seconds. 5. 6. Ella had looked up from the field guide seminar. At 8 seconds, she felt the right hip begin to destabilize, the specific signal she knew, the one that meant the load was shifting. And she made the decision that Logan had taught her to make. She recognized it and accounted for it and came down into the chair in a controlled, deliberate movement that was not a fall. It was a choice. That was the difference. 6 months ago, it had been a fall. Now it was a choice. The room did something then that rooms did when they'd witnessed something that cost something. Not applause exactly, or not just applause, but the particular sound of people releasing breath they'd been holding, which was its own kind of response. Some people were crying. The lead therapist was crying. One of the first patients, a 26-year-old man named Thomas, who was 3 months into his program and had been making the specific kind of progress that Logan tracked with quiet certainty, was looking at Sophia with an expression that had no name but that everyone in the room understood. Sophia sat in the chair and looked at the window. Then at Ella, who had crossed the room and was now standing beside her, close enough that her shoulder was against Sophia's arm, which was the specific geography of Ella's comfort. Not in front of, not behind, but beside. 8 seconds, Ella said quietly. 9, Sophia said. I counted 9. Ella looked at her. Field guide? Field guide, Sophia said. Out. Logan stood near the back of the room. He'd been there for the 8 or 9 seconds, whichever it was, with his hands in his pockets and his heart rate doing something he didn't fully acknowledge, watching the person he'd watched every day for a year stand up in a room full of people who needed to see it. He thought about Sandra Reyes, who was on the other side of the room talking to David with the ease of someone who'd had a hard day and come through it, which described most of the days she'd had for 6 years, and which she managed with a toughness that Logan had only recently given himself permission to fully respect without the weight of guilt distorting the view. He thought about Ella, who was beside Sophia now, shoulder to arm, doing the things she did, where she showed up in exactly the right place without being told where that place was. He thought about a November night 14 months ago when he'd been standing at a kitchen window watching headlights come up an access road in the snow, and the particular quality of his life at that moment. The quiet, the work, the daughter, the functional peace he'd built in Montana that was genuine but also incomplete in ways he hadn't fully admitted. He hadn't been unhappy. He'd been provisional, waiting for something he couldn't name. He thought about 8 millimeters on a yellow pad. He thought about what it meant to watch someone who had stopped believing start again. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of sessions and late nights and honest conversations, and one question from a 7-year-old at the kitchen table. Are you scared? And the answer, some of the time. And the pause after, me too. He'd been a researcher once, and then he'd been exiled from research. And then he'd been a private practitioner in a remote cabin who worked quietly and published nothing and kept his approach to himself because the last time he'd let it touch the world, something had gone wrong that he couldn't fully separate himself from. He'd called that humility. He'd called it appropriate caution. He'd called it what he'd learned from Austin. He'd also, if he was honest, called it hiding. He wasn't hiding anymore. The center was here. The protocol was filed, finally, with a research collaborative that Sophia had connected him with. Not published, not sold, but shared, available to practitioners who could use it, documented carefully with the full history of both its successes and its failures, Sandra Reyes included. He'd told the whole story, not the version that made him look okay. The whole thing, because that was how it was supposed to work. As Ella had told him months ago, with the certainty of someone to whom honesty came naturally and had not yet been complicated by self-protection. The truth was that what he'd built here, what they'd built, Famtar, was not a clinical triumph. Sophia could stand for 9 seconds. That was real, and it was significant, and it was the result of work that had mattered and been done with care. It was not a cure. It was not the end of the chair or the end of the hard days or the resolution of every physical limitation that the accident had created. The world was not going to line up cleanly on the other side of a single moment at a window. The truth was that none of the important things had been clean. The truth was that recovery, the real kind, the kind that happened in people rather than in case studies, was not a story about returning to what you were. It was a story about discovering that what you became in the hardest part of the hardest time was not something lesser. Sometimes it was something more. Not in the inspirational sense, not the gift wrapped in the wound, but in the plain sense that people who were broken and honest about it and kept going anyway accumulated something in the going. Something that smooth people and easy luck people and people who'd never had to examine their own architecture didn't have. He looked at Sophia across the room. She was talking to one of the donors now, Ella still beside her, the conversation animated, Sophia using her hands the way she used them when she was genuinely engaged rather than performing engagement. The donor was leaning forward. This happened with Sophia. People leaned forward when she talked, because she talked like someone who meant what she was saying. She caught his eye across the room, held it for a moment. Something passed between them that didn't need a name and that he wasn't going to give one to. Not here, Not now, not in the compressed language of a look at a crowded event. But it was there, and it was real. And they both knew it was there, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. He looked away first, looked at the window, the ridgeline, the pale November sky above the tree line. He thought about something she'd said 6 weeks ago, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight while they worked on the protocol, in the specific register of things said late at night when the defenses were down and the sentence came out before the speaker had decided to say it. She'd said, "I keep trying to figure out what I lost, and I keep finding things I didn't have before." He hadn't answered it in the moment. He'd written it down later, not in the yellow pads, those were data, but in the old notebook he kept in the drawer of the workbench, the one that held things he didn't have a place for yet. Here was what he believed, having spent 40 months of his adult life examining what happened when the body's signal was lost and what happened when someone tried to find it again. The finding was never clean, and the path back was never the same path, and the person who arrived on the other side was not the same person who had set out. They were someone made by the specific difficulty of what had happened to them and how they'd chosen to face it, and that someone was not less than the original and was in most of the ways that mattered more. He believed this about Sophia. He believed it about Sandra Reyes. He believed it about himself, though that one was harder, and he held it more carefully, and some days he didn't fully believe it, and those were honest days too. He believed it about the patients who would come to this center in the years ahead, the people who would drive or be carried up that access road in the state they arrived in, whatever that state was, and would sit in the session room that he and Sophia had built out of a barn and a converted storage room in an argument with the county zoning board, and would do the work, and would find out who they were on the other side of it. He believed that the work mattered, not because it always succeeded in the way success was measured, but because trying, genuinely, with attention and honesty, and the willingness to be wrong and start over, trying was the thing that made a person something more than what had happened to them, and that was worth building a place for. Tomas came to stand beside him, near the back of the room. He was young, 26, 3 months in, and he had the particular quality of someone who was early in the work and was trying to understand what the later parts looked like. "Did you know she could do that?" Tomas asked, looking at Sophia across the room. "I knew she was close," Logan said. "What does close feel like from your side?" Logan thought about it, about the yellow pads, about the first 11 steps, about 8 millimeters on a Tuesday in November that had meant something he'd refused to name out loud, because naming it would have made the distance between where they were and where they needed to go feel like a verdict. "Like watching a signal strengthen," he said. "You can't always tell when it'll break through the noise, but you keep the conditions right and you watch the data and you stay in the room." He looked at Tomas. "You stay in the room even on the days it looks like nothing's happening, especially then." Tomas nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that what you tell all your patients?" "It's what I tell the ones who ask real questions," Logan said. Across the room, Ella laughed at something Sophia said. The sudden bright laugh of a child who found something genuinely funny rather than performed. The sound that Logan had learned in 7 years to identify as the signal that his daughter was completely herself, unguarded, fully present. It traveled across the room and landed on him the way her sounds always landed, directly and specifically, the way your own child's voice always finds you through crowd noise, as something set apart. He looked at them, his daughter and this woman who had come in from a storm 14 months ago and had become, without announcement or ceremony, a permanent part of the shape of his life, and felt something that he'd been circling for months, something he'd kept at the edge of his attention because the center had needed building and the work had needed doing, and there were always reasons to not yet look directly at the thing you most needed to see. He'd have to look at it eventually. He looked at it now, briefly, standing near the back of a room in a barn that had become a center in the November afternoon light, with the ridgeline outside the window and the pale sky above it, and 40 people around him who were here because of what this place stood for. He let the feeling be what it was, without a verdict. That was enough for now. Ella looked up from across the room and found him, the way she always found him, and raised her eyebrows in the specific expression that meant, "Are you okay?" He raised his back. "Yeah." She held up the field guide, already open to the current page. "Victor," it would say, in her careful print. "Eastern Ridge, present, observed." And below it, in the category she'd invented and defended as scientific, positive indicators. The hawk, the signal, the return. Some things showed up when you built the right conditions and stayed in the room. That was the whole of what he knew, and the whole of what he'd given, and the whole of what had been given back to him. It was, he thought, without performance and without apology and without reaching for words that were larger than the feeling, more than enough.